Hi, everyone. Welcome to Author Talk. I'm Sarah Donovan, and we are talking with authors who contributed so generously to the anthology Just YA Young Adult Anthology for grades 7 through 12. And this is an open access resource, so it's available for free for teachers and students. But if you want a paperback, you can get one of those too. So today we are here with Zetta Elliott. Welcome, Zetta. Will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you are in the world?
Sure. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about my contribution to Just YA. I am a Black feminist writer in Chile, Chicago, although I am originally Canadian, so I should be hardy enough to withstand Chicago temperatures. It has been especially cold this winter, though. And I'm the author of over 40 books for kids and teenagers. And I actually never really thought of myself as a poet until maybe the last 5 years. But poetry has been really important to me, and I turned to poetry in times of trouble, shall we say, and we have certainly had those lately. So I was grateful to find a home for my poem in your anthology.
Well, we're so happy to have it. And it occurred to me that I really want to ask you this other question that I didn't sort of prompt you about. So you just said that you have only sort of named yourself as poet recently, but have you always seen yourself as a writer?
Pretty much. I mean, when I was a kid, I was a storyteller. And so I don't think I even understood writing was a profession. I didn't know how books were made. I didn't know it was a career option until I was 13. And I had an English teacher, Nancy Vickert, who took me aside one day and said, "You'll be a writer one day if you want to," and told me I just had to write every day. So from the time I was 13, I was pretty committed to being a writer. But up until then, I just knew that if I wanted an audience, and it was pretty hard for me to find people who wanted to listen to me when I was a kid. But if I wanted an audience, I had to be a good storyteller. So that was an important lesson to learn early on.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, I think as a teacher, we know how some of us know, and maybe we don't always think about the power that we have to name our students or encourage our students to see themselves as writers. And I think that's speaks to the power of teachers in the story that you just shared.
Absolutely.
Well, I wonder if we can have you read your contribution to Just YA, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about it.
Sure. So the poem I am going to read is called Moonscape. Today, a reporter described what's left of Gaza as a moonscape. And I wondered, what moon looks like this? I see no craters, no frozen seas, just chalky limbs dangling between slabs of concrete that once were ceilings and floors holding space for life, homes for countless families, now turned into tombs for thousands of children who never knew lunar lightness, only the gravity of living in a prison designed to destroy dignity.
That I remember the first time I read this poem. And I remember you shared a couple poems with me when we were thinking about this anthology. When I read this, I had the chills then, and I have them right now as well, listening to read this. Can you just say a little bit about how you came to write this poem and your process of creating it?
Sure. It's very clear in my mind. I am a bit of a news junkie. I have done a reset as of 2025, so I am consuming about half the news I normally consume, but that's still about 4 to 5 hours a day, which is too much. So I am still trying to trim back, but I think because I am an introvert and I do enjoy solitude, I spend a lot of time alone. Um, I don't want to feel disconnected from the world. I don't want to feel as though I'm in denial about what's going on or I'm just sticking my head in the sand. And I try to watch, as many different news channels as possible so I can see who's covering what and who's not covering what and see who's reporting with bias. But I almost always watch PBS NewsHour every day. And they have, sort of like 4, 5, or 6 awesome journalists, and I love watching them. But Nick Schifrin said Moonscape once when he was reporting on Gaza, and I was so upset that I almost thought about writing them an email. And then I thought, no, I'm going to leave it. And then he did it again. And I was like, I don't understand what's happening here. Like, I don't understand if he's thinking moons in different ways because it just doesn't fit. And it's so, to me, inconsistent with the level of reporting that I expect from PBS. So um, I was angry, and I often write poetry when I'm angry because when I'm angry, I tend to be incoherent. So I am a writer. I'm working on a novel right now, and it's very easy for me. Right now, I'm averaging about 2,000 words a day. But with a poem, you don't need that many words, and you don't have to write in a complete sentence. So I find that poems are a valuable strategy when you're responding to trauma. Like it's easier for me to write about my childhood when I'm writing a poem. It's easier for me to write about a failed relationship when I'm writing a poem. I can just get things out more easily. And I sort of imagine Nick Schifrin in my head, this journalist, when I was writing this poem, because like I wasn't trying to, berate him or anything. I just thought, do you understand how important language is in this specific situation, especially, right? Like we can't afford romantic language. And I think too many people think of the moon in a very romantic way. So calling something a moonscape, like I think of the moon and I think of serenity. I just think of peace, like the kind of devastation, man-made, man-caused devastation. That is not what you find on the moon. I haven't been there, but I've seen
Yeah,
pictures,
yeah,
and that is not what I associate with the moon. So, for a while when I was watching the news, if someone came on with an opinion about Gaza that I did not want to hear, I hit mute. And then I had to really check myself. And I thought, you know what? When you hit mute, you're hearing nothing. So you don't even know what these people are saying. It's not like I had the captions on. I was just completely tuning out that point of view. And I knew that was wrong. So I stopped hitting mute. And I was listening to someone who's a peace activist in Israel. And I was so happy that I did not miss that person's point of view. And then just as he was about to end, he said, you don't know what it's like. Imagine yourself just walking along, minding your own business, and someone punches you in the face. And I just thought, minding your own business, like, how could you possibly frame the Israel-Gaza conflict in those terms? But it's kind of like 9/11. My dissertation was on trauma and representations of trauma. And, 9/11 happened, and so many, particularly white Americans, were thinking, people hate us? Like, this is the beginning of the history of terror, 9/11. And I was like, wow, hello, there's a long history of terror that, in fact, likely contributed to 9/11. So I find it really important that we think carefully about the language we use when we're talking about not just historical events, but current events, because it's so easy for language to do violence. And I don't ever want my poetry to do that. Moonscape is in a collection I just self-published called The Ruin, the Rubble, the Rage. And I needed poems because for the past year, it's been really hard to write. I just found that like, even the title of that book, The Ruin, the Rubble, the Rage, I wrote that down and then I couldn't get any further. But I wanted to use it for something. So it is difficult to talk about painful and traumatic situations, but I think poetry at least opens the door and says, you don't have to capitalize, you don't have to use punctuation, you don't need a complete sentence. It doesn't have to rhyme. It could be two words, it could be two sentences. Poetry makes a lot more things possible.
yeah. Wow, Zetta, thank you for sharing all that. I think the metaphor, the metaphor that or the similes or these figurative language that people use to try to make sense of something they can't name or they can't describe, or they're trying to help you understand what it means. So they're drawing on, the moonscape or drawing on punched in the gut, like, but there's so much an understatement, and it's even an
Right.
to call it
So
that.
inadequate.
So
Yeah. And then
inadequate.
in
And I
some
think,
ways,
yes,
distorting.
hmm right. It's yes, it's distorting, and it's but we're especially when we're working with young writers, and we're trying to find the understanding, and we're searching for the metaphors. Like maybe maybe what maybe what I love about your poem so much is that you take that metaphor that doesn't work, that's not enough, that's and unpack that to say what it's not saying. And maybe that's why this is, maybe speaks to me so much, and why for students as well, is if why is that metaphor not enough? Why is a I just why is a punch undermining the severity of this? Why is the moon minimizing it, right? And I feel like
Right.
that's a way into thinking about how we might take draw on your poem for what it teaches us about Gaza and the news, but also a mentor text for our students to do some of the writing about the metaphors that don't work for them either.
That's excellent. That would be an excellent conversation to have with students. And it makes me think of Nikki Giovanni and one of the poems that she allowed me to put in my book, Say Her Name, which I think of as a mentor text. And she ends it with, maybe these are not poetic times at all, right? Like maybe I need to go, I think she says, check my carrying supply and clean my gun. Like she's speaking this revolutionary language because someone has told her that she should write poems about the sky. And I think we still have sort of a culture that assumes poetry is romantic and it's only going to be about daffodils and clouds. And that comes out of a very particular European tradition, right? Which was inherited by a lot of American poets. But specifically marginalized
Mhm.
poets from marginalized groups. I mean, poetry is a revolutionary act. It is radical, it is resistance. And so, yeah, if you are reading my poem because you want me to talk about flowers, I might, but it's probably flowers growing on the graves of somebody else. Like, I'm going to tie it back into reality. I don't ever want my poetry to be an escape from reality, which frustrates me because I decided 2 years ago I wasn't going to write any more poems about death, and I just couldn't do it.
Mm,
Yeah, that's my limitation. So I'm going to work on that in 2025 and see if I can think of other uses for poetry in my life.
mm. Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly thinking about the way that writing serves us as writers and nurtures and sustains us, but and if you have to write a poem about death, um, it will help us understand it. I know that much.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Well, Zetta, I wonder if you could say a little bit about what you're working on now. I mean, of course, you're such a prolific writer, and I know you always have lots of things going on, and you're also so generous to other writers and spaces, and of course, with your time here. But yes, we'd love to hear what else you have going on, or if anything you want to share with us that we can start to learn more about your writing.
Well, so it wasn't really a resolution, but I had been trying for a few years to get back to writing for adults, which is when I started out writing for adults, and switched to writing for kids and teens. And I finished my middle grade series, Dragons in a Bag, uh, 3 years ago, I think. And then I wrote a prequel. And then I was like, that's it, I'm done. And now, right now, I am a quarter of the way through book 7 in the series. I am going to do one more book and bring the main characters back together. And then that's it. And then I really am going to pivot and try to get back to some of my adult projects, which have been sitting on the shelf for a very, very long time. It's hard because whenever things pop up in the world, I imagine how I would want to talk to young people about it. That's the teacher in me. I'll probably always do that. Um, but you're calibrating, you're dialing it down or dialing it up. And I think I want to turn the dial up to a point that I'm still writing about childhood, but it's not for a child audience. So yeah, I'll be moving on to a project I started in 2020, middle of the pandemic, when I was living in central Pennsylvania. And I imagined 4 teenage girls who were convicted of killing their abusers and they were sent to adult prison. And then a woman came up with a restorative justice program that got them early release if they agreed to spend a year in a farmhouse in central Pennsylvania working on an Amish farm. And when they're working on the Amish farm, they discover there's a cemetery in the far corner of one of the fields that once belonged to a Black church. And so there are these voices from 17th and 18th century Black women who actually lived in central Pennsylvania. I found them, fortune tellers and powwow doctors and fugitives and poisoners and a really interesting assortment of women. So it's a hybrid verse novel. And yeah, I need to get back to central Pennsylvania and finish that.
Oh, wow. Well, I cannot wait to read it. Thank you for that. I mean, I do as an educator, and I would encourage other educators who are watching to follow you on social media to see some of the things that you're interested in and also the places that you travel as part of your writing. I think it's um, really lovely. You're just a lovely human being, and you bring joy to my life when I follow the things that you're doing and also make me think about things. So we are so grateful for your voice in this anthology, Zetta. Is there any closing remarks that you'd like to make before we say goodbye?
I just really want to express gratitude for you. It's so interesting that children's literature has all these overlapping circles. There are teachers and librarians and parents and scholars, but we can also end up siloed. And sometimes, I feel like I was raised by two teachers, and being around teachers feels like being with family, but sometimes I do feel kind of distant from teachers. I go into schools and I'm mostly talking to kids. So this is an opportunity to engage with teachers, and I really appreciate, like I said, you made it easy. You really did. And yeah, I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing, being that bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Zetta. Good to be with you.
All right, take care.